spooky things, scary things, beautiful things. We have a bunch of all of those, 20 different things, and we're going to do a deep dive on them right now. This is Spider's Web, and this is from about 1900. It's actually the second edition. It came out in 1898 by McLaughlin Brothers, and then Milton Bradley bought the rights to it because it was such a popular game at the time. And you see little Miss Muffet sitting there with the spider coming down beside her. This is a board game. It's great chromolithography, such good color, and even the inside is, because the board, which is just the bottom of the box, and it's not entirely perfect. You can see that there's some holes on the side, but the landscape is really clear still, and such great graphics. And it's got all the original pegs in the spinner, and you would take these and you would spin the number of spiders that you would cross and go to the center of the web. It's perfect for Halloween coming up, but really the reason the Spider's Web was done was that children at this time were often taught about ancient Greek mythology. And this all harkens back to the legend of Arachne and Athena, if you know the term arachnophobia having to do with spiders. Well, Arachne was a mortal, and she was a very skillful weaver. And she challenged Athena to see which one could make the most perfect tapestry. And Athena made a tapestry that showed all of the gods as wonderful, majestic creatures who could do mortals in if they didn't do what they wanted them to do. And Arachne showed them in their immoral and foolish ways. And that was not pleasing to Athena, who was one of the gods. And so Athena came after Arachne. Arachne decided she was going to hang herself to avoid the wrath of Athena. And Athena took pity on her and turned her noose into a spider's web and turned Arachne into a spider. And so Arachne forever was able to spin webs and weave, but had to live as a spider for all eternity. And that is the story of the Spider's Web. I just thought that was such a great basis for a board game. And the idea that children were educated in such a way at the end of the Victorian era is very different than the way we educate now. But there was a lot of allegory, and the idea was that if you knew the story, you would mind your elders, because look what happened to Arachne when she dared to upstage Athena. So there was a moral to this story. This was such a famous game in its time that it ended up being one of the games shown at the New York History Museum's board game exhibition in 2001. It's a really cute game. It's complete. It has everything it needs. It is in worn condition, but it is all there and intact. And we're going to start this one out at just $9.99. We have a buy it now on this one of $24. Our next piece came from one of our viewers, and it was very kind of her. She sent a number of ambrotypes, tintypes, and daguerreotypes of family members from New York in the 1850s through 70s. They were people who were distant enough relatives that no one in the family knew who they were, and she wanted them to go to a good home. And one of them was this woman in the very fine dress. And this is in a union case, and this union case has nice flowers on it. Now, the case is worn, but the hinge is intact, and the hooks that hold it shut are still there. And the velvet liner is in good shape, as is the gold surround. Ambrotypes were the successor to daguerreotypes, and daguerreotypes were the first type of photography, and they had a reflective background because of the way they were done using the silver emulsion on glass. Ambrotypes were done differently. Ambrotypes were an easier process because they used a negative printed on the glass, and the way they made it look like a positive is they put a dark background behind it, like you see, and that would bring out the positive image. So they were a little bit of an advancement, but they still couldn't be easily reproduced. Well, then the next generation after this in the 1860s are tintypes, and that's what we see the most of from the Victorian era. So ambrotypes only last for about a 10 or 12-year period. So you don't see a ton of them around, and there are people who collect them specifically because of what they are, but a lot of people also collect because of the images. Someone who's interested in Victorian fashion, for example, might love this woman because of her jewelry and her dress. Especially the dress. That is quite a fine print on that. So I think it's a really neat piece. It's a 1/8 size because the plates could be as big as 8 times this size. So This is an 8th size. They also did 16s and even tiny little ones that were 32nd sizes. We don't know who she was, but she lives somewhere in the upper Hudson River Valley because that's where the family was from. So it might be that you need to adopt an ancestress, and here's one for you. We are going to start this off at $9.99. It also will have a buy it now of $25. Next up, we're zooming into the 20th century with this guy. I just thought he was so neat. He's got a certain whimsy. I found this up at the Packwood Swap Meet in Washington State. Wonderful, huge swap meet that happens up in the mountains twice a year. And this guy is by UNESCO, and he even has his original label that shows that he is the foreign sports car, because little foreign sports cars became very popular in the 1950s and 60s, and UNESCO started in 1958. Now, this guy was originally meant to be a cigarette holder with an ashtray because you can see the indentations there. Whoever had this one used it instead for coins or something like that. The back lifts off. You see the trunk / body of the car opens up, and you can put all sorts of things in there. Coins, tie bars, dollar bills if you want to hide them in there. But originally it was meant to have cigarettes in there, and then you put your cigarette butt in this place here. Ensure Company was the UNESCO company originally, and they were a mail order catalog. But in the late 50s, they determined that they really needed to control the production of their own ceramics. That's a story that comes up fairly often. We're going to hear that from another maker later on in this broadcast. But Ensure decided that they wanted to do the designs and have them done by companies in Japan that could do good quality work. And this is one of the pieces they made. It's in really great condition. There is one tiny speck on the edge of the beret there that you see where there's just a tiny little bit of color loss. It could be colored in. I did not feel right about doing that. I will leave that up to the buyer to decide if they want to do that or just leave it the way it is. But it's got the metal that simulates the windshield still there. Foreign sports cars were a big deal in the late 50s and early 60s because it was the first time they were really exported to the United States, and it was a type of car that we didn't have, little and fast. And they really started to catch on, and then pretty soon we see American companies starting to develop sports car lines as well. But this would have been something simulating maybe a Triumph or a Porsche or something fast and little and fun. And he just is having such a good time. He's got pink cheeks from being in the convertible. I just thought he was really cute, and I think someone else will too. It does have the original UNESCO label on the bottom. We're going to start this one out at $19.99, and we do have a buy it now of $39 on this one, which is a typical price that these sell for these days. We did a bunch of short features last month, and the one that got the most views of all was this piece here. The Belgian rotary phone in copper cladding. I really like this piece. Hello. This one is done by RTT. That was the Régie des Télégraphes et Téléphones in Belgian. I know I'm massacring the language. I apologize to all of our French speakers. But it is a wonderful phone, and it's very heavy, which is why eventually they took this and added a handle to it. I believe this one is a Type 50. There was also what they called a kettle phone. They had a Type 50, a Type 56. They're all very similar to this. Originally, they were done with a zinc coating, and that at a certain point, some of them were redone with copper coating, like this one. You'll also see them occasionally in colors. It's just great. A lot of these were exported to the United States. They were made by the Belgian branch of Automatic Telephone, which is actually a company that we have here in the States as well. And so this one, at some point, was converted to a modern jack. So you could actually use this if you still have the ability to use a landline where you are. It's just so cool looking. They have the brass handle to make them a little bit more portable. This is definitely not like a cell phone. Very hard to hold up to the ear. I just really think that's beautiful. I haven't seen many of these with the copper, and we are starting this one at $59. It is in working order. They usually sell for more than double that, so we're going to see where this goes. I think that somebody will really enjoy having this. It's not a very commonly found phone today, even though they were well made. There just were not a ton of them that came to the United States. Recently, of course, one of the favorite Disney villains has been Maleficent, and Maleficent started out because of Sleeping Beauty. Sleeping Beauty's castle came to be in Disneyland in 1955. It was the first of the Disney theme park castles, and it was based on the Neuschwanstein Castle in Bavaria. It opened in 1955, shortly after the park opened, so it was very early. Disney was a little bit annoyed because the upper area didn't really have a lot of use. All the attraction was on the bottom, so he had a walkthrough developed, and you could go through the top part and have a walkthrough that basically took you through the movie Sleeping Beauty, which was being filmed for release in 1959. And this folio, which I think dates to sometime between 1957 and 1965, because this family, I got paper and they went to Disney both of those years, has wonderful color renderings. Well, first of all, you see Walt Disney with a bunch of little baby boom kids who are all probably grandparents now. And then you have these wonderful renderings of the animation from the movie. You see where Maleficent's curse came to pass, and there is Sleeping Beauty. I don't know. I think if somebody cursed me to sleep for a long time right now, I'd be really happy with that. But you open it up, and then you have this full 4 panels with Sleeping Beauty and all the animals and the prince on his steed. This is the beginning of the Disney princesses, which of course have become legendary and numerous over the years. And there is a wonderful drawing of Maleficent and all her Maleficents. And of course, it has the Disneyland logo on it. This folio was something that you purchased if you went on this particular tour. And so not everybody got this. This is not as common as some of the other ones. It's in pretty good overall condition, just slight creasing at this one corner. It looks like it's been read through a few times, but really overall a very clean, intact copy, no tears, and only one very, very minor stain on the inside of the bottom. I just like, for full disclosure, to show everything, just so people know what they're getting. There's one little tiny yellow spot right there, probably from somebody's finger, some eager child who was eating their peanut butter sandwich or something. We are putting this out also at $9.99. They usually sell for about $30, and we'll see how this one does now. While we're having fun with kid stuff, I wanted to put this out for everybody. I love this. I would have wanted this when I was a kid. My dad actually had a 62 Comet, and it was a light blue, but it looked a lot like the car on the far edge, the blue one there, because that is the stock car. But AMT, which started out in 1948 as aluminum model toys, they were not the first, but they were the most prolific of all of the companies that made dealer promotional cars. They started making them in aluminum in 1948. The original one they did was a 47 Ford. They were based in Detroit, and the fellow who started them had worked with Ford, and so that's why he was able to get the deal with Ford. Well, as time went on, they changed to plastic a few years later, and one of the first plastic ones they did was the 1950 Studebaker with the bullet nose, which is what I'm looking for my collection. I got the 53, and I'd love to have a 50, so if anyone has one out there. This particular one is the 62, and it's the 3-in-1. This is one of the things they came up with that none of the other companies that did these thought of, which is where you could build it yourself as a stock car, a custom car, or a hot rod, because that's what people were doing with cars in that period of time. And so they figured that kids would also like the option of whether they built their model. So they put the basic car kit in, and then you had all these different things that you could do with it to make it whichever way that you wanted. Now, I'm a purist, and even as a kid I was, so I would have wanted it to be a stock car. Most kids would have wanted the hot rod. But it's in really good shape overall. There's a little bit of bending to the box, but it's clean and nice for display. But the important part is when you open the box, the whole kit is in there in its original condition with the car body underneath. It has never been built. It's never been touched. When you're selling models, people want them to have never been assembled, which is asking a lot because, most kids bought these to put together. And so most of them have been, but that's why the unbuilt ones are the most collectible. And this one is unbuilt. And because of that, it's something that likely could sell as high as $60. We're going to start it at $9.99 again. We're starting a lot of the auctions at the very base price this time, and we're just going to let the market tell us what these things are worth to the people who spot them during our 10-day auction. Well, that was fun for Junior. This is something that was a little bit more adult fun because this deck of cards, well, it's called the Lace Shawl, and she is a beautiful flapper who is wearing only a lace shawl and not really covering up all that much. So she is topless in this. They're done in England by a company called Goodall. Now, Goodall actually was very instrumental in the development of playing cards. They started in England in the 1820s, and while they were not the only playing card company, they were the first to pioneer the double-headed card, so no matter which way you dealt the card, you could see it upright either direction. They were also the first to put decorations on the backs of the cards, and they started decorating the backs of cards as early as the 1850s. In 1862, they were the first company to put out commercially printed Christmas cards. So they were very innovative in their time. And another one of their innovations was, as you see in this box here, to make what they called the boudoir line. Now, of course, you see the topless woman playing card and you think, oh, that's what they're referring to. But actually, the boudoir cards came out in 1906, and they were smaller than what had been standard up to that time. But this became the new standard, and these are the size playing cards that we use today because they were easier to hold than the larger cards that were prevalent up until that time. So Goodall really did a lot of things that were ahead of their time, including putting a nude figure on a card, which was a pretty racy thing to do around 1921 when these were made. And we know that it was done in the 20s because they were then bought by a company called WWII, and WWII were the first to put the gold edges on cards. So a lot of firsts with this card deck. And she is quite lovely. She's basically what we would call a pinup now, although she was quite scandalous and I'm sure hidden from view at the time. And that's why, while the box is in pretty worn condition, although the hinge is still there and the tab is still there and it's still intact, the cards are nearly immaculate because I'm sure they were probably never played with because there weren't a lot of times in polite company you could have pulled out a nude playing card deck. Now, by the 1970s, nude playing card decks of both genders were a big party favorite, so society changed a lot in 50 years. This is a complete 53 card deck, including the Joker, and I love the figure on the Joker. He looks like he is a real Joker, actually, dressed almost like a Harlequin with a mask. And all of the deck is here. It's in really good shape on the inside, so there she is in all her glory. And this will be for sale now, again, starting at $9.99. We are not putting a buy it now on this because I have not seen this particular deck of cards. We see lots of new decks for sale. They are all from the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. We see very few that are this old because, again, this was considered quite scandalous in its time, although I look at it as being rather artful today. So the lace shawl is listing on eBay now. Well, speaking of boudoir, our next item is a boudoir item, and it's really quite lovely. And I'm going to put a piece of white paper behind it so you can see the color a little bit better, because this is actually a beautiful teal green color, not forest green, which is more typical of these, but I think you can see it's a teal bluish green, and it is silver overlay. Now, there is a difference between silver overlay and silver deposit. Silver overlay is an electroplating, but it is done in a way where if you broke the glass, you would still have a solid piece of silver. Silver deposit is a very thin layer that's deposited on the glass, and that can wear right off, and there would be no silver left if you broke the glass. It would just shatter with it. So silver overlay is the more collectible. This one has a monogram of a C, and it has a wonderful, interesting scrolling Art Nouveau style to it. And that's because They really didn't know how to do this on glass until about 1895. It was a process invented in England and then improved in the United States where it wouldn't darken and tarnish to a black color. They were very popular and made widely through the 1920s, and then the Depression hit, and silver was too expensive to use as a material. And that's when you see the advent of chrome. So by the 1930s, these are no longer being produced. They had a nice run of about 25 or 30 years. And this is a rather nice example. It's a little one. It's about 3.5 inches tall. And we're going to start this out at $29. We're not putting a buy it now on this because, to be honest, this color is unusual enough that I'm not really sure where it will end. And we're going to find out by letting the people who love this, who are numerous, tell us what they think it's worth. I've been selling a collection of novelty pencil sharpeners. Last month we had Snoopy on here. This month we have a grandfather clock with a swinging pendulum. And that's what's cool about it, that it has motion. This makes it a little different. This one was made in Hong Kong about 1970, and it is metal, which is also different because most of these by this time would have been made of plastic, but there was a revival when they were done as miniatures of pieces. Usually they have a copper tone that were pencil sharpeners that looked like tea kettles and old stoves and that sort of thing. But this grandfather clock is a wonderful bright red paint, and the paint is in really good condition, which matters a lot on these. And even the back is metal. And there is where you put the pencil in. And the metal ones, of course, were stronger and able to withhold the use a little bit better, but they would get chipped. Novelty pencil sharpeners really started to become popular in the late Victorian era and into the early 1900s. And then they start being something that kids get as premiums during the Depression because they were trying to get families to buy everything from Sunbeam bread to little bottles of milk, and they had pencil sharpeners that had all of those shapes with advertising on them. So it became an advertising premium. And then in the 60s and 70s, they became collectible again. I think there was interest in the Victorian ones, but they were scarce and hard to get. So new ones with Victorian themes became very popular. And that's why this grandfather clock was made. I think it's really cute. I love that the pendulum works. So having a working part, having a mechanical aspect is something really different with these that you just don't see very often. So we're starting at $9.99. It's probably worth somewhere around $15, which is our buy it now price. Next up, we have the most collectible, most well-known brand advertising in the entire world. And that is because it is Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola is served all over the planet. It is popular everywhere, and there are collectors for it everywhere. And they started doing thermometers in the 1920s. They were very smart about their marketing. Drink Coca-Cola was their very first slogan. And even though that originated back in the late 1800s, they still were using it on smaller pieces or pieces where you might only glance at it as you were walking into a store. These were often hung on the outside of a store. And this one, it looks like, was hung at one time because it's got just a little bit of bending and a little bit of wear around where the attachment would have been. But the thermometer works, which is very important, and the color is really good. It's not faded, it's not scratched. This is the double Coke bottle design from 1941. They were already doing the single one that's just a Coke bottle with the thermometer, which you see a lot more commonly. But this one was a little more stylish and had a streamlined deco aspect, not just the laurel leaves, but also you can see the streamlining in the horseshoe and the banding around the edges, the big oval here. It's a great design. It's a rather popular one of their thermometers, one of the more popular ones. They even did a few that were similar to the trays with those designs, and those are probably the rarest. But this one is right up there in terms of popularity. The reason they were made of metal, of course, is that these were meant to be permanent. This wasn't something that was being sent to your home. This was something that was going to go on a business, probably on the outside, so that passersby would look, see the temperature, decide, I'm really hot and I need to go in that store and buy a Coke. And so a lot of these ended up being really rough in condition. And so that's why they're pretty collectible when they're as clean as this. And we are going to start this one out at $59. We are putting a buy it now on it, and the buy it now is $250 because these can sell for that much. And if it was absolutely mint condition, they can go as high as $500 now. Coca-Cola advertising, well, they said Coke is it, and Coke is it when it comes to antique and vintage advertising. So this is a really cool piece, and I'm excited to have it to present to the world, and we'll see where in the world it goes now. In 1951, a young recent graduate from art school was sitting in her house in California and wanted to take a vacation. And she said, where is a place that's really different from where I live that I can go see? And she bought herself a ticket on a steamer to Alaska, and she got to Juneau and just fell in love with it and said to herself, if I can find a job and a place to live in the one day that we have birthed here, I am moving here. And she got a job at the local newspaper and found an apartment, and Ree Munoz moved to Alaska and spent the better part of her life there. And while she was there, she taught way out in the bush in a place where you had to go by umiak, which is a certain type of canoe, 13 hours outside of Nome, Alaska. So she really got back in the bush, met the people, saw how they lived, became just intrigued, and started to do watercolors based on Alaskan folk and folklore and what she saw. And this one, the Berry Pickers, shows the traditional gowns, shows the Canada goose, and shows them picking blueberries during one of the nicer days of late summer and early fall. And I think it's just charming. Ree Munoz worked most of her life in the field of art, and by the 1980s and 90s had become very popular as an artist. She was exhibited at the Frye Museum in Seattle, which is a wonderful museum. And you see this one was done in 1994. There were 1,250 in this particular edition. She has developed a following all over the nation because a lot of people who went to Alaska on cruises discovered her work and took pieces home. So you will see this in all 50 states, even though it's the most widely known and recognized in the Northwest and, of course, in Alaska. She passed on at the age of 93 in 2015. There is a real interest and a big collector market that's developed for her pieces. This whimsical and evocative piece is going to be offered at an opening bid of $59. The buy it now on this is $135 because pieces this size, this one is 15-inch by 13-inch in the frame, typically do sell in about that price range. It's very nicely framed with its original gallery tag on the back, and it tells her whole story. She really loved her adopted home, and it shows. And while we're north of the border, for those of you who remember the TV show Ice Road Truckers, which now you can see 24 hours a day on an obscure cable channel, I've been watching a lot of it, is this hat from Coldfoot Services. Coldfoot Services is a place that we recognize now because of Ice Road Truckers, but Coldfoot actually goes all the way back to the Alaskan gold rush of 1898. And people going up to the gold fields in that area established a town. It grew pretty quickly. It had saloons and restaurants and stores and, of course, a brothel or two because that was the frontier at that time. And it lasted a very short period of time. Then they found more gold to the north, and the town basically was disassembled and moved to the new location, and Coldfoot ceased to exist until the Alaska Pipeline in the 1970s. And all of a sudden, it was in the middle of the haul road to get the materials up to build the pipeline and to service the northern communities, and it became a place again. And it was a somewhat temporary place. The pipeline was built, Coldfoot started to turn into a ghost town again. But then the haul road became a truck route, and there was a need for a place near the mountains in the center point of the trip for there to be emergency shelter, services, and That's why Coldfoot Services formed, and Coldfoot was rebuilt, in fact, largely by truckers who would bring extra materials that were left over, or if they had extra room on the truck, they'd bring things and drop them off. They would even volunteer their time to help build it. So it's a pretty fascinating story. Coldfoot has a whopping population of 34 permanent residents, and they are there year-round, including in the harsh winters when it can be 50 to 70 degrees below zero. And those trucks, as you've seen on that show, run all the time. And somebody went up there and got this hat. And it's a foam front, so it's got some age. It is indeed the northernmost truck stop in the world. This is a men's large. And you notice it has the ear flaps built in because, well, you need some protection when you're all the way up there. It's in really good shape. It's very clean. Just something different to put out there. And we are going to start this also at $9.99. These typically sell for about $25 because just not many people get up that far to get one of these. We're listing these items on eBay, and if you are seeing this early, you are a level 2 or 3 member, and if you're seeing it afterwards, well, take a look because they might still be available and you can follow along and see how they do. When Admiral Perry enforced the opening of Japan, it started a round of entrepreneurship amongst Japanese people during the later part of the Meiji period. And one of the families that got involved with that were the Morimuras. And the Morimuras started a trading company in New York City in order to export Japanese goods to the United States around 1896. And they quickly realized that people in the United States loved Japanese porcelain, but that quality control was very difficult. And so they started the Noritake company. And one of the early things that Noritake did was this vase, and it is to look like naturalistic materials like tree bark. It's a rather obscure piece. It has wonderful orange butterflies. These are definitely colors we see of interest to people in the arts and crafts period around the 19-teens. You look at it and you might think, oh, 1970s colors and tree bark like treasure craft simulated, but this is much, much earlier. On the bottom, it has the hand-painted Nippon mark. The M in the wreath is for Morimura Brothers, and that's why we know this is Noritake, even though it's not marked Noritake, because they controlled that porcelain firm as well. And it says Nippon, and that tells us that it dates sometime in the 19-teens era. They marked it with Nippon. We didn't like that because we called it Japan. So by 1921, we said, no, it has to say Japan on the bottom. It took a while before that was fully enforced. So by the 20s, you start to see the end of the Nippon mark and the beginning of the Made in Japan mark. So this is an early piece. This is a true antique. It is over 100 years old. I think it's just rather fascinating. I have never seen in person a Noritake tree bark, and it has texture. You feel the texture here. It's like it's an applied layer over the top. I think it's really interesting and really artful and rather scarce, very attractive in a very specific way for a certain type of collector, and that's why we're putting it on eBay. There are very few woolen mills left in the United States, but at one time they were all over the place, and that's what lured a fellow named Thomas Kay, who was a worker in a woolen mill in England, to emigrate to the United States, and he ended up in Oregon. He and his family established a woolen mill in Salem, Oregon, and then they moved to Pendleton. And Pendleton was where they started making blankets that were for trade with the native Northwestern tribes. So they studied patterns, the Cayuse, they studied the patterns of Navajo tribes. But then that trade dried up. They closed the factory. In 1909, the Bishop family joined with them and reopened the factory, and that became the Pendleton Woolen Mills. And this sign, which is, I would say, 1980s version, is a stand-up placard that would have gone in one of the specialty stores that carried Pendleton. I remember the Centerville Western Wear in Centralia, Washington, had these signs in their store, and that was 1989. So that gives me an idea of the date they changed the style a little bit later. You don't really see very many of the signs because they only had a handful in each store. And it's, again, not something that was mainstream to all the department stores. And I like dealer signs in class. They, of course, are famous for their blankets. They started making men's shirts in the 1920s. They started making sportswear just in time for the Depression, and that helped see them through that. And they started making women's wear in 1949. And I think for somebody who collects Pendleton, and there are a lot of Pendleton collectors, not just in the Northwest, but all through the northern tier of the United States, because it's good quality woolen wear, it's great winter wear, and it has been distributed all over. So somewhere out there, somebody who collects Pendleton is likely to like a sign like this. And I'm looking forward to getting it to them. We're going to put it out again for $9.99. We have a buy it now of $75 because we saw one that was actually more recent than this and not really as interesting in design that sold for that price recently. So I know that this is something collectible that somebody out there is going to enjoy. Do you want a funk? Well, if you do, you might really like this because this is an old handbill from the very early career of Sylvester James Jr. Yes, Sylvester of disco fame. And Sylvester started out as a singer in a Pentecostal church when he was a child. Sylvester was born and lived in the Watts area of Los Angeles, and his parents split up, and he had a very difficult early life. He was molested by the church organist, and the church actually turned against him because he was effeminate, and there was this perception that he was to blame for this scandal. He left home at age 15 and left the church and the singing that he loved to do and moved to San Francisco and started singing with a group of drag queens because that was where he found acceptance. And they were called the Coquettes, and they did shows around San Francisco. He was very serious about his music and wanted to be a star, and they were really just sort of having fun being avant-garde. So he left them, went back to San Francisco, started doing solo shows, and this is a handbill from Halloween of 1972 that was posted in San Francisco for his Halloween night extravaganza called Jungle Sin. And he attracted the attention of David Bowie, who made him his opening act on his tour through California. David Bowie said, he doesn't really need to be my opening act anymore because he has more fans here than I do. And so Sylvester from there parlayed that into a recording contract, and then came out with the song You Make Me Feel Mighty Real in 1977. I heard it on an advertisement the other day. It's still being played. It was a #1 dance hit, and suddenly Sylvester was famous. He had Martha Wash as a backup singer. She's famous for It's Raining Men. He became very, very popular and toured all over the country, had a follow-up hit a few years later with Do You Wanna Funk? A couple of other hits that were big in the dance club craze. Life was finally going really well for him, and then he contracted AIDS in the early days of the disease when there was nothing that could really be done about it, and he died in 1988. He left all of the royalties from his records to pay the bills that he had outstanding at the end of his life, and then anything beyond that was to go to AIDS charities, and it is still generating money for them today because there's been a recent reawareness of him. It probably was folded with the idea that it was going to be taken around in a stack and hung, and then never was because it doesn't have any tape, it doesn't have any holes in it. It's in really good overall condition. These are really, really scarce because most things like this, they were put up, they were torn down, they were covered over by the next person, and eventually they wilted in the San Francisco rain and they were gone. So I don't know if you will ever see another one of these. No idea how to price this. So we're putting it out at $9.99, but we're putting it with no buy it now because I do believe this is the kind of thing that someone out there is going to recognize there's going to be a collector for, and they're going to have an idea of what this is worth to them. Sometimes you just can't start with a comp. I had somebody recently say, well, I found this on eBay and it sold, but it wasn't really like it was a pair of cufflinks with pearls in them. And I explained to them, you may not always be able to find the exact same thing. You may not be able to find the exact same brand. Sometimes we don't have any idea what something is worth and we can't really appraise it. We can only guess what it might be worth. My guess is that if the right person sees this and has interest, that it could sell for $100 to $150. I don't know if we'll hit that. We're just going to put it out there and see where the interest is and learn together. And that's one of the reason I do eBay auctions. I realize that a lot of these things I'm saying, well, they typically sell for this price and I could just list it at that price and wait for somebody to come along and buy it. But you never know. Sometimes you get surprises. You just happen to hit it when two people really want something and they bid it up because it's really the thing. Sometimes you put something on and, well, maybe you should have waited and you don't get as much. It's the risk we take. And that's why I have fun doing these auctions. And I hope that all of you watching this bear that in mind, because some people sometimes get really good deals on my auctions because they are watching and they bid at the last minute. And if there's not another bid, hey, they get something really great. But that is part of the learning process. And it also is how we establish a value for something that doesn't have one. If I wasn't selling it on eBay, I'd send it to some other auction house in San Francisco and let them put it out and see what they could get for it. And it would be the same thing. We wouldn't know until we tried. Well, Sylvester was certainly a controversial figure, and the next couple of items that I'm going to put up are also going to be controversial, because the first one is a 1939 medal that was given out to a civilian in Nazi Germany for support of the war machine, essentially. And it does have a swastika on the back. We don't use the word Nazi in our listings. We, first of all, don't want to attract neo-Nazis to these things. That is not our customer. And that's not the people who buy this either. They're not really interested in the old stuff. The people who buy this are the people who are on the other side. I have sold these to Holocaust museums. I have sold these to militaria collectors whose parents fought and died in the war. And this is meaningful to them because this was brought home as a war trophy. This was brought home by a GI who said, look, we won, we defeated this evil, and I want something to remember what we conquered. And that is the customer for these type of items. So when you list them on eBay, you describe them as a German World War II medal, and you talk about what it is. This is a fairly common one. They gave out about 5 million of these, and it could have been for something as innocuous as they wrapped bandages for the soldiers. We gave similar awards out to the people who were civilians on our side who did similar things. We're going to put this one out at $9.99. Typically, this should sell for around $29, which leads us to our next listing. And here was our response as shown in pinbacks. Wanted for murder, Adolf Hitler. And they show the use of the swastika, which we should discuss because the swastika up until World War II, and typically they pointed in a different direction, but swastikas were an old Sanskrit emblem. They were used by Native Americans, and they were considered a good luck sign up until the Nazis appropriated them. And after that, nobody in this country used them. Hang Hitler is the other one. These are true home front pins. They are from the Second World War. You can see the oxidation. They came from an estate of an 80-year-old gentleman who told me that these were his grandparents, and I believe him because they have the right wear, the right amount of age. The sentiment is harsh, but as it turned out, we didn't hang Hitler, but Mussolini was hung by his own people, and Hitler took care of it himself. I know I get comments sometimes when I show things that are racist or sexist. There is a reason for it. That feeling of discomfort that people get is important because it binds us all together, because all of us at some point have been treated badly because of something that was just part of our nature. And that negative feeling that we feel reminds us to treat other people better and to be a little more tolerant of people who are not just exactly like us. So that is why I show these things. And that is why there's a customer for these things. The last time I showed something like this, they were two anti-tojo pins and they sold for nearly $80 for the pair. So we're going to put these out again at $9.99 as a pair, and we will see what they go for. But there is a collector for these, and the collectors I've met who are after these, their heart is in the right place. Our last piece of militaria is this. This is much older than the eras we've been showing. It is a French bayonet made at the Châtellerault Arsenal in 1878, and we know that because when we pull it from its scabbard, first of all, it has the etching and date from the arsenal in which it was made. Secondly, we see that it has not been sharpened, and this is very important. This was a true military piece. This was not a decorative sword to be used in a parade. And so you don't want to take a sharpening stone to this and affect the patina. You want it to look like it did after years of sitting in its sheath. A lot of people make the mistake of thinking, oh, it'll be better if I polish it. This is absolutely something to leave alone. And that's why we've done nothing to it. You want to see the old patina on the handle. You want to see it on the stock. You want to see it on the blade. There is a little bit of a crack in the handle where this rivet is. Otherwise, the condition is very good. It still could be used. It has all of the right marks. You want to know that the handle and the blade go together. The numbers are correct, and it is in really good shape overall. It's got the right markings on the guard here. Very nice piece in really good original condition. I suspect the value of this is somewhere in the $150 range, but I haven't been able to find a similar one for sale. And it was made after the Franco-Prussian War, so it won't have the same import that it would have as an item from that war, but in all likelihood, this was used again in the First World War. So I'm sure a military buff will find it interesting, and we're going to put it out now at $69, but we're not putting a buy it now on it because I don't really have a recent sold value to compare this, and I want to let it run and see what the current interest in the marketplace is. We do this also as an experiment to find out where the market is at any given time, and we think that that's a fun thing for us to do and also to show you so that when you're out there as a collector or as a reseller, that you have an idea of where prices should be based on our experience. Our penultimate item this time is another pocket mirror. I've been selling off a fun collection of them as well, and this one is a bigger one than usual. For the 50th anniversary of the Fredman Bag Company in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It has a good mirror, which is a little smudgy. Fredman Bag Company is still in existence, and they just recently merged with another company. If it wasn't for the fact that they're now part of another company, I would have approached them and asked if they wanted this for their archives. When I saw vacuum cleaned, at first I thought it said vacuum cleaner bags, and I was going to put this aside for Zeno, because we all know that he has a bit of a vacuum fetish. But it turned out that they just clean the bags using a vacuum when they're done, and that it wasn't quite the same thing. They make all sorts of packaging now, and the company they merged with makes other types of things. So I suppose if you still need bags, you can still call Fredman Bag Company. It's in great shape. I'm finding that pocket mirrors are really popular as advertising pieces, as pieces that have fun portraits of people on them. There's all sorts of reasons to collect pocket mirrors. And we've been doing rather well with this collection, so I thought it would be fun to put another one on and see how it does. Again, we're starting this at $9.99, and no buy it now on this because I've been finding with the pocket mirrors that it all just has to do with who is interested in a particular design or a particular motif for some particular reason. It might be that they want something from where they live. It might be that they want something with old buildings on it. It might be something they want because they're involved in this industry. So we're just going to let the people out there who are interested tell us. And that brings us to our last item in this flight of 20 items that are going on eBay, and I really enjoy this. I always look at old photo books and scrapbooks when I go to sales, and this one jumped out at me because it said Camp Memory Book, and I thought, oh, a camp. I thought maybe summer camp, maybe a scout camp. And then I opened it, and it turned out to be rather interesting because it's full of real photos, and I love it when they have annotations so you know what they're showing you. And this is all about leaving Los Angeles in about 1920-21 and going to Arroyo Seco. And there they are driving up the highway in an old 1920s car, and that car is going up a dirt road. Now, that area is near Castaic, so it is surrounded by massive suburbs today, but it is still a natural area and a park, and perhaps that's still a dirt road. Then there was this place that they show where you could rent a horse. They talk all about the horse. They show a wonderful picture of the horses moving a piano over a creek. I think that's fantastic and really unusual. This is all still Arroyo Seco. When you start having unusual pictures in photo albums like this, that really adds something to the interest and the value. So the horse moving the piano, that picture alone is worth the price of admission on this. Then they show Switzer's camp, which was called Switzerland. This is 1929. Some of these are real photo postcards, and some of them are actual pictures. These are all real photo postcards, but they show all of the attractions at Switzer's camp. Mount Gleason near the Big Springs. This is on the Trail to Loomis Ranch, also in 1929 at Alder Creek. So these are pictures of rural Southern California back when it was much more rural than it is today. And it's really fascinating seeing how empty it is, seeing the old ranches, what old California was really like. And I just think it's so fascinating. And I've really been enjoying going through this. And I know someone else is going to enjoy having it and reading through it, and also seeing things that they can compare to what they look like today. And they even have a picture of Collie, the captain's faithful friend. These pictures are from 1924 by another creek, Camp Buckhorn. So these people really like to go out in the wilderness and go to the ranches and go camping and show all sorts of things, many of which are very different today, some of which probably no longer exist. And that makes things like this interesting and potentially valuable. And then they also have a section in here where they show the people who were involved. There's the Queen in 23, the 23 gang. Just love the pictures of the people too. So it's not just landscapes, it's also the people and how they lived and the experience they were having. Probably about 100 photos and postcards overall in this. And so I think it has good value to somebody. It's also a nice leather book that's in pretty good condition overall. I haven't done anything to it. I'm not going to put leather cream on it or do anything to try to shine it up or anything. We're going to leave that to the ultimate purchaser. But I think somebody who's a historian in California or who is a resident there and just thinks that seeing the old way things were is interesting is really going to enjoy this. This one's not going to have a buy it now. We're going to start this at $29 and we're going to see who the ultimate collector for this is. I think this will go to somebody who will really enjoy it, and I suspect it will go for pretty good money because of the nature of what it is. And we'll find out how all these things do in a follow-up video when they sell. Thank you so much for joining me for this. It's always fun to curate and put aside these things over the course of a month so that I can show a wide variety of different things. If you enjoyed this video, leave a comment. If you have suggestions for things you think would make it more interesting, leave a comment about that too. If you enjoyed this video, check out this one. Also, click thumbs up to like this video and check the description for information about our Patreon, our memberships. We've got a lot of different levels with different perks and bonus videos and early content. Also, please do check out our website, theantiquenomad.com, for appraisal help. And we'll see you again for more adventures in the antique and vintage community soon. Bye for now.